Good afternoon. The series of talks that we have had here at the Hawaiian Village Hotel and over on Maui could very well have been foundations for the work that was done in Europe and back in New York. Seems strange that this work should have come after the 1960 work, yet there must have been some reason for it, because if you follow this work that we have had here and on Maui, you will find that it will have a tremendous influence in your own consciousness, in your own being. The result of it, and I have been over it since it's been given, and have read it since it's already been transcribed, and it has a quieting effect. It has a restful effect, and it has the effect of, shall I say, overcoming fear or enabling us to drop fear. And that, of course, is always a good foundation for the experience of coming into a deeper awareness, a deeper realm of consciousness. So I would first of all say to you, insofar as you can, go over these Hawaiian Village tapes and the Maui tapes as often as you can, hear them as often as you can, and until you actually feel yourself released, as these tapes will do for you. Now, behind this is something of deeper significance. I often wonder what the effect on the world would be if there could be a few groups of people in the world devoid of fear. If there could only be a few small groups of people devoid of fear, what would happen to the rest of the world? To what extent would that transfer itself? Just as in an individual household, when there is one parent only interested in a spiritual study, it's marvelous to see the effects on the rest of the family. The degree in which fear is lost, the degree in which the major sins and the major diseases seem to be ruled out of those households where there is even just one serious student in the family. And don't forget, I have watched this in thousands of homes, many thousands of homes in this past 30 years, and seen how comparatively free they are of most of the world's problems. And that is with just one individual, or two at most, being the leavening influence in the entire family. What then would happen in a community if there were small groups living without fear? And of course, the question that arises there is it ever possible to live without fear? Is it possible for an individual, just starting with one, to be free of fear? And the answer is yes, if you know why. if you know why it is that fear is really a nonsensical sensation or emotion. Now, in this past 100 years, the world has learned all about the laws of electricity, the laws of electronics, the laws of the atom. Many laws never before known are now known and harnessed and utilized. But up to this time, a law, or perhaps series of laws, that have actually been revealed to the world for several thousand years are actually not known to mankind today, not understood, not practiced. And yet, literature is full of these laws, and if they could be known to an individual, they would set that individual free. If they could be known to groups of individuals, I'm sure that the freedom would come not only to those groups, but to entire communities. Now let us, for a moment, examine some of these laws and see what we have been overlooking. And I think that I do not know of anything really better than this to serve as a foundation for the explanation. Now, this is a quotation from Emerson's essay on compensation. There is always some leveling circumstance that puts down the overbearing. Though no checks to a new evil appear, the checks exist and will appear. The dice of God are always loaded. Isn't that tremendous? Now, all you have to do is think back to Caesar, who governed with an iron hand, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great. If we want to come to more modern days, the czars of Russia, Hitler, who couldn't be conquered, who carried everything before him. Think. Go back in history and find dozens more illustrations and see if you cannot agree that the dice of God are always loaded. That even though at the moment there appears to be nothing to stop the onward march of tyranny, of evil, in one form or another, inevitably these checks appear and become manifest. Now, Emerson, and he's really transliterating from an Oriental teaching, says that there is always some leveling circumstance that puts down the overbearing, but he doesn't name it. He could have named it because he knew it. This circumstance is a law. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. As ye do to another, so it shall be done to you. Whatever you bind will bind you. Whatever you set free will set you free. Because all life is really lived at the center of our being, and the outward circumstances are governed and controlled by this inner law. The law is very clear. If you sow to the flesh, you reap corruption. If you sow to the Spirit, you reap life everlasting. Of course, the question comes up there, what do you mean by sowing to the flesh? What do you mean by sowing to the Spirit? And the answer is this. Do you place the power in flesh or effect, or do you place power in an invisible source? In other words, let us look out at world conditions today and ask the question, are we fearing the power of men? Or, if we were going to vote tomorrow, would we be putting our confidence or faith in some man or group of men? And then you know whether you are sowing to the flesh, because if you are fearing man whose breath is in his nostril, you are definitely sowing to the flesh and will reap corruption. On the other hand, if you have any faith or confidence in men, if you have any belief that there is a man or group of men who can save this world, you are equally sowing to the flesh. Because putting faith in princes has been outmoded for centuries. Putting faith in man whose breath is in his nostril has given us the greatest betrayers of mankind. Remember that every man who has ever betrayed anyone or anything was first given confidence that put them in the position to do the betraying. You and I have never betrayed a nation, but nobody ever gave us the reins of authority. You first must empower someone before they can betray the power. And so it is. Whether we are thinking in terms of international affairs or whether we're thinking in terms of our own national affairs, it all comes down to, shall I fear what mortal man can do to me? Shall I fear human circumstances or conditions? Shall I have faith that there is a man or group of men who can save me individually or the world collectively? The answer is, in either case, you would be sowing to the flesh and you would reap corruption. Now, to begin to understand that there is an invisible law operating, it is called the karmic law, the law of as ye sow, so shall ye reap. To understand that that law is operating in consciousness would absolutely stop one's fears, because it immediately gives the assurance that evil in and of itself cannot be perpetuated. Evil in and of itself cannot stand. And the very moment that we withdraw the power from idols, the minute we withdraw the power from men or organizations and place that power in the invisible, we automatically and instantly release ourselves from any evil that man or conditions can do. We may not instantly release this world from it, for there is no such thing. We release ourselves individually first, and then in proportion as we are released, we bring release to those who come within range of our consciousness. It is true that 10 righteous men can save a city, and it is true that a very small group of individuals who no longer place their confidence in a political party or political candidate can change the entire election, results of the election. They can absolutely take the evil out of an election, and that doesn't mean they can elect their candidate or their party. It only means that out of the candidates who are running, that those nearest to the level of spiritual integrity would find their way elected. And that would be done only by those who could give up their faith and confidence in any man or party, realize that all power is in the invisible. Yes, let me put it this way. In certain places, votes are controlled by certain interests. For instance, in some places, it could be said that the labor vote will control the election in that community. In some other community, it could be said that a church would dominate the election because they're in the majority, and it would control the election. In some other places, it would be said that the industrialists have control of the votes in their community and would do it. And it is that very belief that perpetuates the evils of our world, our political world, because the power is not in an individual or in a group. The power is in the Spirit. And when we withdraw our faith, hope, confidence, or fear, and place our entire reliance on the law, on the invisible, on this very statement that though no checks to a new evil appear, the checks exist and will appear, for the dice of God are loaded. No, you say, it hasn't been that way in the past. No, it never will be. As long as man is placing his hope, confidence, and reliance on man, or as long as he is placing his fear in man. This only begins to operate in the experience of those who have come to the realization, Pilate, thou couldst have no power over me unless it were given thee of God. Or infection or contagion, thou couldst have no power over me unless it were given thee of God. For there is no power in the visible form. The power is in the invisible essence, substance, and law of all form. Of course, for 90 years now, metaphysical healings have taken place on the very recognition of the fact that the power is not in the form or effect, that the germs do not carry the power, the weather or the climate does not carry the power, that all power is in the invisible, and to those who have been living in that consciousness, it is safe to say that they have avoided not necessarily all of the evils of this world, not all of the ills of this world, but 80% anyhow, and that is a wonderful start in the very first century of the understanding of such laws. Let us see this. Since everything that takes place in your life or mine has to take place first within your consciousness or mine, it is within our own consciousness that we have to come into an agreement that there is a law that as ye sow, so shall ye reap. There is a law that operates eventually to put down the overbearing. There is a law, you can't name it, you can't touch it, you can't see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, or smell it, but it exists, and it has brought down every evil form of government that has ever been set up. It has torn down every individual who has gotten out of hand, who has gotten too great for his own britches, whose head has grown too big for his own hat. Every such individual has been brought down to earth. And as you have seen, it doesn't take forever. Now, somewhere in this world, a start will have to be made to bring about God's government on earth. And you have all witnessed enough to know that God's government on earth hasn't been brought about by praying for it. God's government hasn't been brought about on earth by all of these warring churches. God's government will only be brought about on the same principle that you can bring about health and supply and companionship in your own life. And that is not by going out and believing that you are going to get God to do something for you, or that some new religion or some new teaching or holding to some thought is going to bring God down into your life, but in the one way in which you have been taught, and that is in the realization that the only real law is a spiritual law, and that material and mental laws are not laws and only operate as law while there is a belief in them, a conviction of them, or a hope or faith in them. But you, in your individual life, you prove your health in the degree that you can maintain in your consciousness the fact that the only operative law is a law of spirit. In proportion, then, as you come to see that the things, the conditions, and the persons whom you have feared have only been power as long as you let them be power, and that you could end that at any time that you could recognize an invisible, so will you bear witness and be a beholder if you can look out on this world scene and realize, I have no reason to fear man whose breath is in his nostril. I have no reason to fear 1,000 men united. Yes, on this point of unitedness, heaven knows there have been combinations of men, combinations of states, combinations of countries, and none of them survive. Go back to your history since the beginning of time and see how every combination has ultimately fallen. Because strength isn't in union. Strength is only in oneness. Strength is only in the realization of one being, one power, one law. That is why in this work, one individual becomes a light. They become a light unto their family, unto their community. If they wish to dedicate themselves to the spiritual life, they can be lights to an entire universe. Because it takes only the dedication to a principle. Not the dedication to man, but the dedication to a principle, the ability to live inwardly in the continuous realization, I need not fear man whose breath is in his nostril, and certainly I must have no faith in man whose breath is in his nostril, for I am convinced of an invisible life, an invisible law, invisible being. I hope that every Infinite Way student in the entire world will read an article in the Reader's Digest of October 1960, which is a reprint from an earlier one, Why a Scientist Believes in God. He doesn't believe in it. He shows you the actual proof that there is a God, probably better than it has ever before been presented by anyone. There could be no room for an atheist after they get through with this article. And the beautiful part of it is that all it takes for us to attain freedom from fear is a conviction that there's a God. Now, believe it or not, there are not many people on the face of the globe who believe that there is a God. When asked, they say, I believe in God. But they don't. Few do. Because wherever there is a conviction that there is a God, there is no fear. Because the very word itself must signify omnipotence. That would leave nothing to fear. It would signify infinity, eternality, and that would even remove the fear of death. It would have to signify omnipresence, and that would instantly remove any fear of any presence, whether it appeared as a person or a party or a group or anything else. Even an ideology. Who could fear an ideology in the presence of God? Who could fear bombs in the presence of God? Can't be done. Therefore, actually, the solution to the world problem is the solution to individual problem. And it must be solved on an individual basis first in order that it can take root in consciousness. There is always some leveling circumstance that puts down the overbearing. He doesn't define it, explain it, he states it. There is always a leveling circumstance, and there is. That leveling circumstance is God, law, spiritual law. And he rightly concludes the dice of God are loaded, because nothing in the end can ever be revealed as power in the presence of God, for then there would be no God, or God would be on a finite human level or limited level, and then it wouldn't be God, because the Word itself must give to us the feeling of omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, and then in that realization our fear goes, and when the fear goes, the object of the fear disappears. Always when fear goes, the object of fear goes, because the object of fear is only fear itself externalized. And there cannot be a fear in the presence of a realization of spiritual law. Spiritual law does not overcome other laws. Spiritual law, being infinite, omnipotent, is the only law. And therefore, and probably that is what has made it difficult throughout these years, this spiritual law is not evident to human sight or hearing, taste, touch, or smell. And it can only be observed by its effects. And so it becomes necessary to really see the history of this world and see how inevitable is the downfall of whatever is wrong. On the other hand, if only you could watch, if only you could be separated from your own lives long enough to see what has happened in only the last 50, 60, 70 years in the way of bettering this world. If only you could see the permanent good that has come into this world in man's relationship with man, in nation's relationship with nation, then you would know, and then you would realize how close we are to the end of all of these national and international disputes. Not differences, no. As long as we are humans, there must be differences of opinion and differences of interest in a minor way, but see only the change that has come into this world in commercial relationships, international relationships, and so forth. You'll see that, taking the overall picture, there has been a gradual elimination of many of the evils that existed 50 or 60 years ago, and there has also been a gradual coming into focus of more harmonious relationships on a permanent basis. Undoubtedly, evolution is doing its work. Undoubtedly, there is this silent, invisible, operating in human consciousness, bringing about this change. And we are now witnessing probably the last of these overbearing peoples or nations. as the adjustment is made to clear up some of the evils that have existed the past 200 or 300 years. We are right now in the process of adjustment as much or many of these evils are being dispensed with. But we can hasten the day, not only for ourselves individually, which isn't of too much importance, except that it affects the demonstration of the entire world. In the overcoming of our fear through the realization of an invisible, which is a presence, which is a power, and which is overturning and overturning and overturning until he come whose right it is. There is an invisible. Therefore, you'd be surprised what a great contribution you could make to the world by not going out into the world to fight these so-called evils, but by having additional periods of meditation for the realization of the impotency of these and the impersonal nature of these evils. Instead of fighting certain men, instead of fighting churches, instead of fighting political parties, just to sit home and realize the impotent nature. Let them do the fighting. And find, as they did in ancient days, that the enemy fights itself and destroys itself. It does, if only we don't enter the battle, but can sit on the sideline in the realization of the impotence of that and those who appear to be the overbearing. I'm searching for the word outstanding, or the major premise in my individual experience has always been, since this work began, the realization that there is an invisible, and I've called it an infinite invisible, and I have been able to withdraw from the battles of the world. I have been able to withdraw from the battles to earn a living, the battles to compete, the battles even to carry this message out. There are no battles connected with this, no proselyting, no fighting, no arguing. There has been an absolute inner realization that the might of the world is an invisible one, and not only that it is invisible, but that it is good. And a relaxing from either physical or mental fighting gives it the opportunity to come forth into expression, whereas to engage in might or power, physical might or mental power, is an ignoring of the greatest force there is in life. The greatest power, the all-power, the only power, and that which is the real power. And it has been misunderstood because language is difficult. When Gandhi spoke of non-resistance, the whole world believed that he meant do nothing. But he didn't mean that, because his non-resistance resulted in the freedom of India. So it wasn't do nothing. He was doing something so constructively that it did what all of the previous fighting never could do. So it is We had a civil war that was supposed to free the Negroes. It never did. Negroes are only now being freed in this country. They weren't freed through a war. They were freed through the evolution of consciousness. The only freedom they ever gained from the Civil War was a freedom from being sold on a block. But aside from that, they were kept in the same slavery they'd always been in. Work from sunup to sundown and not get paid for it. The Civil War didn't save them from that. Evolution, this operation of an invisible that led them step by step and step by step until now. Now they're coming into their freedom. And so it has been. There have been wars, Boer War in South Africa, all being undone because it didn't accomplish its purpose. But there is a silent, invisible force performing its function of freedom. Freedom and abundance and literacy and all the rest of these things that we know to be necessary and to be good. So it is. No one can define that which they have faith in. They can only feel that there is an invisible. I see it as I look out into these trees. 10 years ago I spoke of it here. Seeing them one day without coconuts and a few days or weeks later with coconuts, and asking why and how, and then realizing an invisible power overcoming gravity, overcoming resistance, almost a nothingness appearing outwardly as very solid form. So you can see it in your gardens as you see your bushes without flowers and then with flowers, and you realize too that there is an invisible, and it's operating, and it's bringing forth after its own image and likeness. To fear men, circumstances, or conditions is to make idols. To have faith in men is to make idols. But to understand that without the use of physical or mental force, there is always a spiritual invisible, a law in operation, a love, a life, a presence, a power, and then the ability to rest back and let it function. This is the grace that brings about the changes in our human experience. This is where the power of grace comes into expression. There too, there isn't a class ever held that someone doesn't send a question up, what do you mean by grace? And it can't be defined. It has to be felt. The power of grace is the power of the invisible. It isn't something earned or won. It isn't something that you wait until it strikes you. It is something you bring into expression by the withdrawal of fear, for man whose breath is in his nostril, and withdrawal of faith in man whose breath is in his nostril. And when there is no longer fear or faith, the power of grace comes into expression and brings forth everything and everyone needed in our experience. That's why, except to students who've read, studied for a long while, it isn't possible to explain grace. But grace actually is the operation of a law that can only function in the consciousness of those who have put up the sword and who have also put up their faith in man whose breath is in his nostril, or in papers, or documents, or unions, or unitedness, and witnessed his own faith retire to the invisible. For some, this is too difficult because they must know how it functions and why and so forth and so on. And for these people, it's hopeless until they have come to a place of rising above that which must be reasonable. I know less about the workings of the Spirit than perhaps anybody else in the world, because I know nothing about it. I only know this, that it works, however it does. It works when there's no fear and when there's no faith. When there's not even faith in right thinking. When there's not even faith in holding a right thought. When there's not even faith that God can do something. When there is just no fear and no faith, and there is just the realization. Do you know that if you look out at this world, you can't find one single trace of error except in man and his works? On every other level, grace operates beautifully. But man has blocked grace from operating. He has blocked God from operating by his fears and his faith. He fears effect, or he has faith in effect, and that's the one thing that blots out the operation of the invisible in our experience. And you can watch it because it operates proportionately. If you only lose a little of your faith in man whose breath is in his nostril, or church or political party, if you only lose a little fear in ideology, and if you only lose a little faith in the people and things in which you've had faith, and drop it all into the invisible, you'll watch right from the beginning that some measure of change will take place. And then you'll know that it's only a matter of proportion. None of us have attained the full and complete freedom for the simple reason that we cannot attain the full and complete release from fear and faith. The reason is that neither this fear nor faith is personal. It's a universal miasma. It's a universal hypnotism. And as much as you might individually overcome it, there still will be enough of the universal operating so that, as I've said before, even the most dedicated find that they are not 100% free of the sins and diseases of the world, but at least many, many, many attain 3/4 and more of that freedom. The full and complete freedom can only come as the degree of the universal fear and faith is lessened. You'd be surprised if you could experience the simplicity of meditation once you have neither fear nor faith. You'd be surprised how easy it is to settle back into a meditation when you have nothing and nobody to fear, and when you're not looking even to a God with faith. When you can settle back in the complete realization of is. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not fear. The Lord is my shepherd. The infinite invisible is, and it is operating. Well, you know, since finding this, I find it even easier just to think that the dice of God are always loaded, and just let God and his loaded dice take the responsibility for governing the world. We owe a great debt to Emerson, greater than we know. And this is one for which I'll owe him a little extra handshake when I meet him. The dice of God are always loaded. Isn't that comforting as you look out at this world and just realize that the overbearing are brought down, individually, collectively. In, I don't know whether it's one of our books or letters, but it says that when I look at an individual or a condition and realize that there is neither good nor evil in them, that I can immediately settle back in peace. And that is exactly what happens in meditation. The minute you can go into meditation realizing you're not going there to get anything, nor to get any powers, that there isn't any you need. For whatever is in the invisible is. And so when you go into meditation with nothing to overcome and nothing to get, in the realization there is neither good nor evil, neither good to be gotten nor evil to be overcome, instantly you are freed from human thought, and you can settle down into a tabernacling, a communion, an inner communion. Watch and see if it isn't true that the only thing that interferes with your perfect meditation is that either good or evil will come into your mind. Either the desire to get rid of evil or to get good. And it is only in the overcoming of that, and that can only be overcome through the realization of this invisible. I don't have to do. If I speak of myself, I bear witness to a lie. I don't have to do. I have to be still, and it does. That too in meditation is a stumbling block. I must attain this, I must attain that, or I am trying to be still. There should be no I trying to be still. Because it doesn't make a difference whether you're still or not. God is. God is. Being still isn't going to make God do more than God is doing. The only thing that's going to bring God into your experience is your own degree of realization that there's neither good nor evil. And so if you want to make noises, make noises. Good will still come into you. Nothing shall by any manner of means harm you. And not a thing in the world is going to do good for you. Being still won't do it. Being noisy won't prevent it. It's a matter of realization. Is there an invisible? And is the law, the karmic law, inevitable? As ye sow, so shall ye reap. Then let the evil ones do their sowing. They will do their reaping. And someday awaken. Well, I guess that completes it. Thank you. Thank you.